the second point, which I'm going to call slow speech, is more about the immediate social interactions you have. And I call it slow speech because if I look at all the communication, I don't really want to call it problems, but so I'm really interested in how people communicate. And most people, most of the time, communicate suboptimally. So, which is to say that they communicate in a way that's not in line with what they want to get out of an interaction, right? And a lot of these problems, a lot of the problems of either, you're not expressing yourself clearly, or there's tension when you talk to people, or loads of other things, are basically from, it's almost like being in too much of a hurry and being too self-focused, essentially. And so the very simple idea here is the idea of seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And slow speech, like if you just think of any interaction as just slow it all down, that will fix a lot of these problems. So I'm basically deliberately presenting something that's really simple, but that is tied to many different things, right? Where you don't even have to understand the details of everything that's going on in the background. If you just think about just slow it down, you will automatically improve across like loads of dimensions that usually cause problems in communication. And so the first aspect of slowing down is to listen intently. And something you mentioned just before was to listen for the sake of listening and not to wait for your turn to speak. And I think this is one of the most common, let's say, communication mistakes people make. And it's very natural, right? That you're listening to a conversation and you're kind of waiting for your in. You're like, ooh, I can say something about this. I was like, I can't wait for you to stop talking so I can get my thing in.
And you know when you're doing that, because what will happen, the best conversations I have are conversations where, like right now, we're like in a flow of conversation, something will come up, but then you'll carry on talking, something will come up and I'll just sort of let it go.
Mm.
But what I've noticed is the worst conversations I have, or the least satisfying conversations where we don't really connect that well, is when I'll have something come up and I'll just sit and just pay attention to that thing while that person keeps talking to me. And then when there's a break, I'll be like, right, here's this thing I thought of 5 minutes ago that might not even relate at all to what they've just said. And they'll know that. It's like, that's not quite related to what I just said, but and if two people are doing that, then they're not really communicating. I mean, they're flapping their gums at each other, but like they're not actually communicating. So they're communicating suboptimally, as you would say.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a natural thing. And one of the things you can do is to trust that if the idea is important, you will remember it. So if I'm sitting here and you're saying something and I do think, oh, I have the perfect thing for this. And because it can also be selfless in the sense that it's not necessarily only about, oh, I want to be the one talking. It can also be that I think, hey, you're talking about a problem and I've just thought of the thing, that you need to hear.
Yeah.
But I can also say, look, I can trust that if this is so important, like I will still remember it like 2 minutes from now. I can let you finish still,
Yeah, I don't need to cling to this thing if it's important.
Yeah. And if I forget in 2 minutes, then how important could it have possibly been?
Yeah, of course.
So that's one part of slowing down. So instead of being in a rush to get in, just be okay, just let the other person talk. And also, don't be afraid to pause and think. You don't have to fill the gaps of silence. If someone asks you a question, you can just think about it for a moment.
Yeah, well, the thing is with that, it just comes to mind. I went on a date with a woman once, and I quite like to enjoy this. I quite like silence. I can sit in silence for a really long time. But on this date, we were talking, and she'd ask a question, and I'd sort of take a second, and just be like, and then she'd fill it with another question. It's like it was really quite remarkable. I'd never been on a date with someone or been in someone's presence up to that point with someone who was so uncomfortable with silence that it needed to be filled with like another question or something like that. And it was inherently, the whole conversation was like quite stressful actually. Because it's like forced me to have to like come up with an answer really quickly before she'd like dive in with another question to try and fill the silence. it was like we were just making noise at each other, but
Mhm.
I didn't even know the person really.
Mhm, mhm.
So yeah, sit and be okay with silence and be okay with pausing and thinking and yeah.
Mhm. And that also involves there's also the other side is you don't have to pounce on every silence that another person leaves.
Mm.
You can also give someone else a moment to think about it. And yeah, I think that's something that just upgrades the quality of your conversations. And another one you also mentioned already is just ask questions. You know, if you want to be seen as the most interesting person, be the most interested person. So you just ask them about them. And that can be sometimes that can just be a lot more interesting than talking about yourself. Just think about it. You already know all this stuff about yourself. Why not find out about the other person, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you say that, but I must say there's certain things that I've found out about myself through talking about myself
That's
in a conversation.
yeah, that's a fair point.
So, but yeah, it does make sense.